Okay, welcome, and we're going to call this meeting to order on Tuesday, January 19th.
We'll go ahead and start roll call.
Yes.
Pedro Naya. I believe I saw his email there. If he can unmute himself.
Here.
Warsan Artan. And Norma Travis Peterson will be joining us at about 10:30. Kate Clark.
Present.
Estela de los Rios.
Here.
Kara Desert.
Here.
Angela Elliott Santos.
Policy advisory committees and boards.
Present.
The way that the structure is, we have this.
Rashid Essa. Eleanor Evans. Okay. Tammy Gillies. Oh, we're just promoting her over to panelist. Tammy Gillies.
Present. I'm sorry, technical problems today.
Okay. You're very faint, just so you're aware. We did hear you though. Bill Gore. Taha Hassan.
Here.
George Corey.
Present.
Nicole Murray Ramirez. If you can unmute your phone.
Here.
Thank you. Thank you. Ellen Nash.
Present.
Angel Ortiz. Elena Perez.
Present.
Gwen Sanders.
Present.
Summer Steffen.
Present.
And Samuel Choi.
Present.
Norma Chavez Peterson.
Present.
Thank you, Madam Chair. That concludes roll call.
Okay.
And we do have one public speaker.
Okay.
Let's see. It is Francine Maxwell, who wanted to speak on a matter that is not on the agenda.
Okay.
Let's see if we do not see her phoned in yet. So we will keep an eye out for that.
Okay.
With that, Madam Chair, the next item is the discussion of any community-raised matters relating to Commission promoting positive human relations, item number 4.
Okay.
As you do not have any public comment today at this moment,
Yeah.
Did you want to hold off on that one?
Please.
Okay. And then we'll go ahead and put up the PowerPoint. We'll ask Jess Chacon to share her screen. It is agenda item number 5, which is the development of the mission statement for the Office of Equity and Racial Justice. An update and discussion, and the presentation will be by our consultants, OBI and UPD.
Good morning, everyone. So Wendy has the PowerPoint. So Wendy, if you want to start sharing your screen.
Yes. Let me do that.
Denise, it's going to be Wendy who needs screen sharing capability.
Hi, Wendy. You should be able to share your screen now.
Okay, there we go. Great. Is that working for everyone? Yes. Okay, great. Thank you.
So thank you for the patience with sharing my screen. You weren't able to get the slides in advance, so thank you for being patient with that. I will, Claudia is going to help get these slides to you all, and I think that will be really useful. So there's a lot of examples in the presentation today. Depending on time, we may not be able to get to all of them. And then I will also put in an appendix with some additional resources from our institute. So I think this will be very helpful for you all as we go forward with this project, to get a sense of how we work as an institute and the way that we're seeing this project to be what we keep calling Equity 2.0, or pushing projects to be really dedicated to what the initial sentiment around equity is, and some of the tools we use to do that. So we'll just dig in. The first slide here discusses some of the themes. So we were able to do interviews with you all, and we really heard a lot of really great information and deep attachment and expertise in the community there. So we've kind of put the themes into 3 buckets of information. So I'll go over what those 3 things were. Then I'll go into some of the concepts that we use as an institute, but we'll primarily discuss those concepts as we go through different examples. So one of the things that we heard very clearly, consistently from people, is that there's been a long-term effort and a long-term interest and engagement with government, but that this is in some ways a new moment in that effort. There's renewed or new energy around communities understanding more about what government can provide. Some people discussed a new energy around people wanting to participate in government. Some folks mentioned like there's a clear understanding and popular education campaign around teaching people and educating people about how government functions and the services it can provide. But in different ways, there was a really consistent expression of the fact that this is some kind of moment. You know, that word is used a lot to describe things these days. And of course, county government has already been doing a lot of these efforts. So in looking around at the documentation and looking around what your county has already been doing, this is an example of one of those things where there was an unprecedented budget passed by the county. And that speaks to the fact that, you know, when we were looking through the financial records in the city, the county is in a really great fiscal situation, which is unusual for some local governments because of histories of austerity and shortages in budgets. So your county is in a pretty good situation in that way. And it's taking steps to use those resources in ways that are solid approaches for equity. And of course, your commission itself is one of those efforts. One of the next themes was looking at extreme needs in areas of public safety and housing. Those were kind of the 2 that came up most often, as well as food and education. And of course, the expressions of public safety that came up were very different visions of what public safety means. So some of them were ideas of, you know, feeling safe in your community and how different that looks than how other people will feel safe in their communities. So a really robust vision of what we mean by public safety. And a lot of these were problems that had become not necessarily escalated under COVID, but are made very clear because COVID has really put a stress on communities in a way that has really revealed failures in the social safety net and communities. One of the final things, again, partially because this is work and conversations during the time of COVID, there's extreme needs in public health, particularly public health as we can understand it in the fact that access to your housing determines your physical well-being, determines your physical health, and the way that education and access to quality education is a predictor of health outcomes for communities. So thinking about public health in the sense of accessing clinics and hospitals and receiving good care in those facilities, but in addition, these other access points that can change and support physical well-being. And again, these are some of the examples we heard of where people are just, again, COVID is really revealing a lot of the structures of marginalization, of othering, which is one of the themes that we use. The converse of which is belonging. But COVID has really started to reveal in a way that's really hard to contest the fact that people are really placed in really vulnerable situations from the structures that we live in with respect to housing or transportation or education. And I think it's really important, you know, some of my colleagues have pointed out that the phrase that even that I just used, that communities are vulnerable, we should really talk about the fact that structures have created vulnerability. So there's not something that's inherent in people or individuals or groups of individuals that give them the character of vulnerability. Structures do work. Structures create vulnerability. And that idea that structures have direct impacts on people is something that the idea of belonging and Equity 2.0 really force us to focus on, because it's attention to structures and not just an attention to fixing individuals or quote unquote fixing characteristics of communities. That's a really important point, both to use in our language and the way we think about equity. So in that respect, we'll start working through some examples, and I'll talk about the way that those examples are demonstrations of some of the concepts we're using. So I've been using the term Equity 2.0. We've talked about that in previous meetings. And up to this point, I've just said that it goes beyond what equity has come to be practiced. I think it's important to recognize that when equity first became the word, that a lot of people in organizing and social justice movements, equity became a term that was really intended to be this robust approach that we take with Equity 2.0. But in practice, both by nonprofits and a lot of different other institutions, it's become limited in the ways that it's practiced. So that's why we're trying to say, we're going to push equity a little bit further. We're going to talk about Equity 2.0, which we also call targeted universalism. But let's just call it Equity 2.0 for now. It's easier to say at the very least. So when we talk about Equity 2.0, this is an example of a few things about the concept. One of them is what I just mentioned. So that figure on the left is the way we can think about communities existing now. There's those red boxes that make it difficult for people to get up to a particular goal. People just can't reach really important things like the right to housing. The picture on the right is a way that we can think about the fact that people are situated very differently. People experience structures in different ways. So in trying to get to targeted universalism, trying to get to Equity 2.0, Equity 2.0 is what we see on that right side. So it's not that we found ways for people to kind of get around those red barriers or navigate around those. We're talking about Equity 2.0, which is a very specific process of analysis and using data and understanding different communities. It's a really robust way to analyze a situation. The goal, again, is to create new structures so that we're not just trying to keep those red structures there and patch things through so that there's an approach around those red barriers, but to create new structural change. Equity 2.0 is a way to do other things that we've discussed. So building bridges between different groups of people. A lot of times, just together, we've had conversations about how complicated it is when we're looking at disparities data or census data that tells us different problems people experience. It's limited. We don't really have, people have so many different dimensions to identity in different contexts. One part of your identity becomes far more pronounced than others. It's a shifting understanding. So, and that idea, Equity 2.0, is a way in which we can start talking about bridges between different groups of people, or bridges between different institutions. And again, those people and those organizations will be at different levels of power and access. So trying to create those bridges is something that, again, takes a lot of thought and analysis around, partially because of what you all have pointed out, that it's difficult to talk about what groups of identity create those different groups that are, again, like the last graphic, situated differently with different structures and different paths that will have to be navigated. One other important part of targeted universalism, of Equity 2.0, is that it's outcomes focused. So what do we mean by that? That's something that is sometimes not clear, but the task before us is often looking and focusing on inputs. So one example I'd like to use to explain that is this lawsuit that came up in Detroit and also in Kentucky around the fact that students were navigating through schools without being able to read. So, you know, if we're thinking of the goal as being able to have students read, it's a really modest goal to be having. Like we can kind of think of that as like the minimum of what we would expect our schools to provide. So the idea is often you just automatically go to thinking about inputs. So often it's school funding that needs to be distributed differently to schools. That's absolutely the case. But what we say is that that's not necessarily sufficient. That's not necessarily enough. Within Equity 2.0, you look at the goal that you want. You look at the aspiration that you want to have. And you do whatever inputs it takes to get there. If it's money, it's money. If it's teachers, it's teachers. If it's all of those things, then you put in all of those things. That's what we mean by outcomes focused. If we don't see the needle move, we're not doing the inputs right. And seeing the needle move to that goal, to that outcome, that's how we measure the efficacy of the platform of policy, the sets of policies we've implemented. Everything is assessed by looking at that outcome. It's goal-oriented. If it's goal-oriented, the question becomes, who decides what the goal is? Like drawing again from the example when we talked to you all around public safety, who determines what the goal is for public safety? That's not at all clear. It's not at all simple. And there's really important questions, especially around that issue, although it exists on any issue, is power and different access to different forms of power. So when we talk about co-creation, often people have started using that term to describe their processes and how they create policy, how they work with the community to create it. But often it doesn't really have substance. It doesn't have a lot of outcomes. And it's used as kind of like a post-it note meeting. That's something that people use a lot to describe community participation processes. It's kind of like checking a box. We're going to start to call it co-creation so it sounds more innovative. But when we talk about co-creation, we're talking about co-creation as a tool for power sharing. We mean very specific things by power. That's important to not just assume that everyone's thinking the same thing about power, but it's a way to say that everyone's got to have a contribution to deciding what that goal is. And we can't assume that it's the goal that everybody is agreeing on. So we'll turn into talking about an example here. This is one that I think I really like it because it's something that's really practicable, and it goes through a lot of really great details around analysis and having discovered problems. So the first thing to think about within government is that despite however much money that we think and that we understand and are learning about how much money is concentrated in Google, or how much money then is channeled from Google to philanthropy or Gates Foundation. I mean, these institutions have just an enormous amount of wealth. The power that government has, especially at the federal level, which then passes down to local level, the governments have access to more resources than anything that could possibly come up in the private sector. So finding ways to get government to meet the needs of people in a really meaningful way, which is incredibly dependent on power sharing, there needs to be a deliberate effort to create trust and to create expectations and to find ways to really influence government. And that's one of the reasons we really appreciate working with governments who are being really ambitious on that front. And if we think about retreating to the private sector or relying on philanthropy, we have to do that in the interim because there's just such a massive amount of resources that government's not providing us. We have to understand that that's a transactional strategy, that's something we have to pursue, but we need to use that in a way that it's toward trying to shift government to fulfill these different needs. So again, bringing that down to something really practicable, in Seattle, there was a really clear understanding from government, because government had a racial equity requirement within each of the departments, that their programming for that year would need to be conducted with a racial analysis component. So any kind of strategic plan or budgeting that they would do, they have to account in some way for a racial equity lens. When this group did it, they realized that there are massive disparities between drowning deaths. So overall, 4,000 people die from drowning each year. The rate for Indigenous people is twice that of white people. For Black and African-American people overall, it's 1.4 times the amount of whites. But it's even more profound if you look at the disparities in young people. It's 10 times African-American Black people, it's 10 times the rate of white people. And then if you look at this other age group, it's 5.5 times. So again, these are disparities that some people don't realize are present, because typically we're looking at education, we're looking at these structures that we're more familiar talking about. But this department, because it was forced to have this racial equity lens, became attuned with this. So they wanted to obviously address this because it's an outcome that could be fixed, could be addressed really meaningful way. So they had, at first, an effort that's sometimes used to counter an othering strategy. An example of othering is those diverse, unfair outcomes, disparities between drowning deaths. So what they did was they went to a universal policy, which was what we call a saming approach. They just said, everybody's the same. We need to give everybody swimming lessons. That's what everybody will need in order to close this gap. So they came up with a public pool program that encouraged swimming proficiency, but it wasn't sensitive to different groups. So again, instead of having that understanding back on the chart where we had people at all of those different levels with different structural barriers, they assumed that everyone just needed swimming lessons. They didn't pay attention to the fact that there's a lot of cultural differences and complications around being in public pools, for example. So the universal goal, which we advocate for within Equity 2.0, to have a universal goal, but not to have universal strategies, not to have the same strategies for everyone. So the goal was that everyone should be able to have safe swimming opportunities and that they should be publicly available. What they realized they needed to do once they realized this was an unfair strategy, that the strategy wasn't helping everyone in the same way, they decided that they would add to the strategies. They'd add a single gender swim time, for example. They'd make the swimming lessons more affordable for people who weren't able to access them for financial reasons. They added a screening at public children's hospitals and with pediatricians that they would have a swimmability indicator for well child visits. So they had lots of different strategies that they brought into it after they realized that the same strategy wasn't going to help all of the people. This turned out to be really, really complicated once they put it into practice, because people realized that those additional targeted strategies were focused on groups that were seen as other. So Muslim residents had a big problem with being able to have public swims with mixed gender. So those were some of the reasons that there began to be a really strong pushback from the community to not allow those, within arguments around equal funding and equal access within the city. So what they ended up doing was being able to, they didn't drop the idea, they didn't drop the attention on it, but they had to shift into a different perspective where they partnered with a private organization, YWCA, partnered with a couple other private sector nonprofits to work on providing this effort. So again, some of those strategies weren't able to be followed through by the city government, but the city government is the entity that really forced the need for those strategies, that really forced through and was consistent and stuck in there with realizing that these things had to happen, even though some of them didn't continue to be funded by the city. One of the ways that power, we can start talking about how power fits into this, is looking at one of these examples from healthcare. So if we think about the indices of othering and belonging, we always say belonging, again, is taken up as a word people are really comfortable with and drawn to. And we say that we can't have belonging, though, unless we have love, power, agency, and responsibility. And all four of those things are really meaningful. As we talk today, I will go through what each of those mean. I think that one of the really important things about love, and this is, because of Reverend Dr. King Jr.'s day yesterday, so I thought we'd use this one, where we really see the relationship between power and love, and that love isn't retreating to a really liberal idea of can't we all just get along, we're all the same, like this colorblind approach, but to say that these things are connected. Love is connected to power and justice. One of the ways that healthcare can be used to better serve public health outcomes, physical well-being, but also be focused on other determinants of health, housing, transportation, education, etc. After the Affordable Care Act was passed, all the hospitals, nonprofit public hospitals, have to do, they're required by the Affordable Care Act to conduct community health needs assessments. And then also within the Affordable Care Act, there's a provision for cities and hospitals to start running what they call demonstration projects, which is an opportunity to have really innovative strategies for what hospitals can provide in a community above and beyond healthcare. So in Kaiser, for example, in California, they started an effort for doctors to be able to prescribe housing vouchers or transportation vouchers, and other ways that health is influenced. So that's one tool for communities to start using. And again, that's an access point for community power to start determining these things. There are some problems with the structural implementation around these needs assessments. There's not enough standards of what they can look like, but it's an opportunity to start organizing around and to start developing the analysis of what community health looks like in a specific city or a specific county. So this is one of the ways that's a tool whereby communities can start co-creating. The hospitals can be pressured, can be led, can be part of a public education campaign to understand how to take full advantage of some of these tools. There's a similar requirement within the Community Reinvestment Act for banks to also have a similar community needs assessment. So hospitals have been doing these since the Affordable Care Act. Banks have been doing them for giving in communities since the Community Reinvestment Act. Again, they're just opportunities. A lot of them are used in a way that limits them, but again, it's a structural opportunity to start changing these important tools within the city. This is one of the strategies that came out that was one of the better implementations of a community health needs assessment, where there's, again, a conventional approach on the left with basic tools that were used by hospitals. And on the right was a better engagement with what health looks like and what determines health within a community.
Wendy, as this chart is in the language, it's harder to see on the small screen. Are you able to put your presentation into slideshow so it takes up, the slide takes up the whole screen?
Oh, yeah, of course. I'm sorry.
Thank you.
I thought that was already there.
No problem. No problem.
Yeah, I think it'll still be harder to see, but yeah, we can do that.
Thank you. That's better.
Yeah, okay, great. And this is, again, one of the models that a hospital has used and again, it was partnered with a foundation to begin to make better use of these community health needs assessments. And this one, again, like focuses on what they call social determinants to health. That's a reference to the way housing can be described as a determinant for health, physical health outcomes. This is an example of, this was an example of what I was able to help with the foundation that was working in the Atlanta area. And they were working in the aftermath of the housing crisis in 2008. And they were wanting to help their communities figure out a way to address the aftermath of those problems. Their first attempt was to work at homeowner education work and small loan funds for housing to patch through the foreclosure crises that were happening there. And they asked us to come in and to figure out if that was the most effective, the most strategic remedy for their housing crisis that was happening in a particular neighborhood around Atlanta. This, I think, is a really important place to talk about the role of responsibility. So when we talk about belonging, including those 4 components, one of them is responsibility, which is really important. And that it's something, the idea of creating belonging is something that we all are obliged to do. So there's often, we've heard this a lot, especially lately, where people say, I didn't have a hand in creating these marginalized structures. People think that, I didn't really benefit from them, etc. But the idea of belonging is something that everyone needs to have a hand in and be attracted to as an effort to work on. And especially within the context of talking about universal goals and targeted strategies, there's an interest for everyone coming to the table, for everyone taking on this work, because having this universal goal is a way that you create bridging between many different groups, because there's an improved outcome for people as we describe and start working out these universal strategies. So the Casey Foundation was working on financial literacy groups. We worked with them over 4 to 10 workshops, a really long-term engagement with them. So we started to say, well, it's not just your small community. There's a lot of slides here, so I'm going to be skipping through. Partially the number of slides is meant to suggest how ambitious this kind of targeted strategy is. It takes a lot of research. So we started to say, in cities and counties, it's often not just the geographic area that you're working within, but it's an entire metro area that's really important to tap into, either with its analysis or economic planning, like these long-term 20, 40-year plans that come out for metro areas, that's really an important consideration at the very least to start understanding. This is one of the first really important textbooks that was making that point. And a new transportation initiative was happening in the Atlanta metro area at the time. So we did a lot of work to look at how transportation subsidies were used across the city. We looked at the way that investments in transportation are job creators. This was a really great research project one of the organizations locally had done that was a survey of riders in the neighborhood, of riders in the metro area on public transit. We were starting to look at different industries that were employers, the racial difference between employers and wages in those industries. We were looking at immigration and policing within that area. In the context of education, we were also looking at the school to prison pipeline and what discipline rates were happening in the schools, the growth of prisons, community assets that were addressing those community concerns and an asset mapping around that. This is a really great project where it was looking at the wealth extraction from the locations and neighborhoods where people had been incarcerated. So all of that research is what we were able to bring to the table to then say, what's a useful intervention project? That we looked at housing and the data on housing. The foundation had already done a massive amount of research on that. But what became clear is that this was a tool for addressing all of those outcomes from the housing crisis, was to be involved in a community input into what the transportation system was going to be doing within the metro area. So it's often to say that when you're looking at these universal goals and these massive problem areas in the city, after you do like this full analysis, it often comes out on the other end when you're realizing that the intervention area should be in a new context. So you might not even enter the process without being open to the fact you might get to a different place. And so that's something that the Equity 2.0 process kind of works people through to try to figure out exactly what the options are and getting a universal goal there. Casey Lehman has this great phrase that he wants, everybody needs good love, healthy choices, and second chances. That's from one of his novels. And that's, in essence, that's what belonging is. Good love, seeing yourself reflected, feeling comfortable and welcomed in different spaces that you're in, having the option for these quote unquote social determinants of health that we've talked about, but healthy choices, and second chances. And so we can narrow that down into talking about how a specific place can create a culture of belonging. And this gets to some of the aspects around bridging, which comes from social networks. There's a whole volume of research where you can actually measure these social networks, measure the difficulty of connecting different social networks. There's a lot of power that resides in those social networks. Bridging with people that are kind of, roughly speaking, at the same level of power is one specific strategy. Trying to build that up into different power structure networks is a different set of strategies. So it's not necessarily simple to say network building, but that's a big focus of what what cultures of belonging can look like within an institution. You know, valuing diversity and belonging. We talk about belonging as going beyond diversity strategies, but diversity and representation is a huge part of what belonging looks like. And creating opportunities for opportunity and bridging that are intentionally designed for that. And you understand this is what we need in our organization. And so those are structured processes, but you can also think about designing an institution so that there's unstructured opportunities for that. So it just is a natural consequence of how your organization is structured, that there's a routine function for bridging and linking to happen. A lot of this has to do within narrative and storytelling. That's something else that, especially since, you know, I marked this to the beginning of Obama's presidential campaign, where there was a really strong focus on telling stories and narrative change. Probably happened before that, but somehow in my head, that's what it's associated with. And that's another way in which Equity 2.0 is a way to share a narrative, to tell stories in a way that's both responsive to the urgent needs of people who are undergoing extreme suffering. You know, right now, most notable in COVID death rates, while also talking about the ways in which society as a whole has something to gain by taking care of these different groups that are experiencing even different levels of need. So obviously attending to people who are most the structures that have made communities more vulnerable and created vulnerability, as well as groups that would also benefit from those structural changes, but might not have their lives threatened at the moment. And so those kinds of stories and those kinds of narratives are really mobilizing and also able to offer greater political will for changes. And Northern California, this is not an example in the slides, but in the appendix either. But there was an effort in Sacramento to have a statewide program to address infant mortality rates. And of course, massive disparities on racial outcomes for infant mortality. So the initial impulse for the strategy was a strategy that is designed specifically to target African-American women and their infants. They were able to do that practice as a strategy, as a targeted strategy. But the language they used around it was that there should be no unnecessary deaths for infants that are avoidable, deaths that are unrelated to congenital problems, etc. But if it's an accidental, avoidable infant death, it's unacceptable. And so they were able to develop a targeted strategy, but within that universal aspiration. And then because of that messaging, because it garnered a lot of political support, it received a lot of funding over the next few years. They were able to develop it into a really robust, sustainable system focused on structural change around those areas, and also had huge benefits and improvements in infant mortality rates within groups that experience that really devastating harm. So that's one way in which storytelling that arises from Equity 2.0 can have really meaningful effects. You know, we talk about ways that people can feel welcome. One of the aspirations that was love within belonging, and then good love within that, you know, Casey Lehman's description. What does that look like? Often, you know, it's again, something that's often used sometimes without having a lot of meat to it. Like we just say love and everyone can get along, we're all the same. But it means something very different than that. And some people have talked about the way this just means I feel like I belong and I see myself where I show up. And this was, for example, one of the screenings of Black Panther, the Other and Belonging Institute hosted when it first came out. We were able to have a screening of it when it was, you know, a week before it was released. And there were like a massive amount of people who showed up for this because it was, again, a place within the Hollywood industry, within popular culture, where they saw themselves represented. The tickets sold out over the course of 24 hours. And then after the movie, our director, John Powell, hosted a conversation panel around housing in Oakland. The movie was shown in Oakland. And people stayed for an hour and a half to have that conversation around housing. And it was a place where people felt comfortable when they showed up. They were able to have really expansive discussions. This is another place where often museums are discussed as important places to house cultural artifacts, important documentation of culture. But often there's not equal access to that because people, it's not like folks don't like art. It's just that when people enter, there's not a representation of them. They don't see themselves there. This was a really fantastic photo series. I see Elizabeth nodding, maybe she's seen it before. It's a photo with portraits of people in the United States, but representing from every single state in Mexico. And then that map on the far left talks about migration paths that people took for getting from Mexico to different areas, primarily in California. So again, it's a place where I went with some of my friends to this museum, and everyone, like my friends who were from Mexico, they took photos of each, they had friends from different states, they took photos of it, they really, like they got excited about it. We were excited about all the different art. This was a really great museum. It's like a social justice museum. But this really drew them in, and like this is what they talked about the rest of the day. It's again, it's like a reflection of love and appreciation for groups that are sometimes not experiencing that. Jess, where am I on time right now?
You're right, probably at maybe like a couple more minutes.
Oh, okay. So again, this section of the slide presentation has a really long list of different strategies within it. We won't be able to go through it all. I just want to preview what it would look like if you want to go through it after you get the slide deck. There's like 7 different strategies that we talk about within here around land management and housing within cities. This is something, again, it came up a lot in our discussions with you, so I wanted to include all of it in case you're interested, and I'm sure some of you are already working on these strategies. A lot of these things are examples of how different cities have been trying to keep gentrification out, find different ways to invest in different parts of the city. Lots of different strategies there. I'll just skip through some of these. This is an example. Where did it go? Okay. Oh, it's animated. I hate animated PowerPoints. This is an example of a strategy that, again, is really well crafted as an Equity 2.0 strategy, where it's an aspiration for every child to do really well in school and be college ready, quote unquote. But then the program took very specific strategies for groups of children who had a really hard time accessing that opportunity. Again, not because of their own capacity, obviously, but because of the way these structures were in place. So yeah, so this just goes through. One of the strategies was that they came up with a specific department in the college to promote belonging. That's happened in a lot of different colleges where it's organized, a lot of them are organized around different forms of programming throughout high school to get them ready to prepare to go into college, tutoring, lots of different things. But the best outcomes have been from colleges who institute a program of belonging, which is completely different, oriented differently. Here's another section where we talk about, there's some examples here about how some corporations have been trying this work. Again, not with, huge impacts of what we describe as the aspiration of belonging, but like first steps of what that looks like. This is an example of, a union, just a brief description of union and immigrant neighborhood. And then the appendix here has links to 3 different videos that we've done at the Institute to describe, again, what these strategies are that you can look up on your own time. There's a link at the bottom to those. And then this is some resources that we've had and created for targeted universalism, which is equity 2.0, as we've been describing it. And then a couple additional things for concepts. But this will be coming to you. Claudia's going to help me do it. And again, I apologize for not having this ready for your packets last week, but we'll definitely get it to you.
Thanks. I also just wanted to leave time for questions, so that's why I said that. I mean, I think we have a few more minutes if you want to like talk through anything else, or if we can spend that time on questions.
Okay, great. Yeah. So what questions come up? You know, just questions about the material, questions about, you know, how we can work in translating this into the new office. You know, questions on any aspects of this.
We have two hands raised. The first member and then member.
Who's going to go first? Sorry, Claudia, you got cut off.
Oh, no problem. Member Chavez-Peterson, if you'd like to go ahead and start, and then member Anaya, and then member Corey.
Perfect. Thank you. Sorry about that. You got cut off when you said who was next. Thank you for that presentation. A couple things that I wanted to just flag as we continue on this process is maybe a little bit of research. I know San Diego Foundation, it's a little dated, but it's about 5 years ago, commissioned with Dr. Manuel Pastor, who I'm sure you're familiar with from USC, a regional equity kind of analysis for San Diego County. Yeah. And I believe developed an equity index. So it would be good, I appreciated some of the case studies and just recognizing, one, the power of government, but also the fact that the nonprofit sector as well as the philanthropic sector and places where you see the best outcomes are places where you've been able to link all of the pieces together, and government is committed to equity, philanthropy, and then of course community organizations. And so I wanted to flag some of that research that Dr. Manuel Pastor has done. I'll put a link on the chat. I'm not sure if that's the final, that's more of the public report. But I know that San Diego Foundation, I also know that California Endowment, City Heights was one of their targeted communities as part of their Building Healthy Communities initiative. So I just wanted to flag that the foundations that have been invested in issues of equity in our region are California Endowment, Ford Foundation, and actually Rockefeller, but that was probably about 15 years ago. So it would be good to dig up at least more of the most current research or data that was gathered, because I think it can help inform how we move forward, especially with a new office at the county.
Yeah, thank you for that. We have been looking at some of that, but I'll make sure we've gathered all of it. Thank you for that note.
Member Anaya?
Good morning, everybody. I just got it was a lot of information, so I appreciate I'm interested in the topic, I get it, but I have to take a step back, and I'm just not quite sure how I'm not seeing a big picture from a strategy perspective. This all fits in with, the work we're doing. For example, the email that went out from the chief operating officer about the coming up and all that. I'm just, I look at that today and it talks about misdevelopment, and maybe I'm just not getting it. All this connects, and if I'm someone who this was my first meeting and I jumped right into this, I have no path. And so maybe it's because I'm a newbie on this commission, and I'm still trying to play a little bit of catch up there. I tried over the weekend to read through the consultant's original work plan to see if I would understand where we're going with all of this. I'm having a tough time there, so I need a little help from our consultant or from county staff to just help me paint the big picture. Maybe not today, but in the future, of how all this is connecting. I feel a little behind, so thank you.
So just so I understand what you're saying, let me say what I heard and tell me if I'm right. that you're wondering how this fits into the programming of making the mission statement specifically, or?
Yeah, I mean,
okay.
honestly, you know, when I got there, that I see, okay, mission statement in my mind, and maybe I'm just wrong here, but I'll put it out there. You know, I may not be the only one feeling this way, so, or I could, and that's fine too. I see, I'm kind of like, okay, when are we going to see a draft, or when am I going to see a time that says we're going to get there? I get a little nervous of too much paralysis by analysis, you know, but if I see a path, if I see kind of the steps, and I'm missing those steps personally, and I think that's why I don't want to say I'm lost, but I get all the material you're presenting, and I see the value of all the material you're presenting, and I know what it's about, and but you know, at the end of the day, you know, if I'm a community member who just dialed in for the first time to a commission meeting because they saw a public notice update on mission statement, would they leave this meeting right now saying, I got an update on mission statement, right? Mm-hmm. Would a member of the public who called in say they got that after listening to, you know, a 40-minute, 83-slide presentation on this? Would they get that? And I'm not getting that necessarily. And I want to just make sure that members of the public who are counting on us to guide, in essence, help guide this process, on their behalf, are getting what they need. And if I can't say with confidence that I know where this is all going, I guarantee you someone from the public may not be getting that. So I need a little help, and know that I may be the only one that's a little lost. But I figure if I don't say something now, I'm just gonna, you know, it's like that kid in the back of the class who stays quiet the whole time, and then just keeps falling behind. I don't want to fall behind because I want to be able to help.
Yeah, let me respond to that just briefly, and then we can follow up let's just assume you're not the only one who asked that question. So we've had on the previous HRC meetings and at the ad hoc, and maybe we should have started with that again today, with an outline of the workflow for this. And so just the basic question on when the draft of the mission statement will be coming, we're having the baseline meeting the 29th, and then 2 weeks later, we're having the Horizon meeting. At the baseline meeting, we'll be reviewing best practices from other cities and also some of the examples that were in the presentation today as a way to talk about the principles. A week after that, we'll have the draft of the mission statement. Then we'll be doing focus groups and a community survey to get feedback on that draft mission statement. And then we'll do another version of that. The second question about how this presentation today relates to the mission statement is that one of the things I've appreciated in working with you all thus far is that it seems like this is a process to just create a mission statement, quote unquote, but this is a much deeper engagement with the community and with yourselves, and really as a process we're trying to such a process such that, you know, it's done within this framework. So we're not going to accomplish all of the stuff we've talked about today. We're not able to do, it's not our task before us right now to work on all of that analysis. But we're trying to structure this process so that it can be set up in such a way that there is this power sharing, that there is this co-creation, etc. But you're right, this is not the ambitious analysis that we're doing as part of the mission statement development.
And
I'll just add, you can, if you look at, it should be on the handout from last HRC meeting. There's, I don't know what page it's on, but it shows a graphic that shows the timeline. And just another simpler way to say this is it's context. This information is context. Yeah, for the more that you know before we work with the community, you know, the better we all are, because you're like the table, you know, that's holding this up. And so the more you know about the approach, the better equipped we'll be as a team when we're actually in the baseline meeting and the Horizon meeting and the focus groups, et cetera, et cetera.
We also had members Corey, Hassan, and Perez with their hands raised. Member Corey.
Yes, good morning. This is Commissioner Corey. Could we have a copy of this presentation? That's my first question. The second thing is, in the future, is it possible to receive such a presentation before time so that we can prepare ourselves, review it in order to be able to digest it?
Yes, on both of those things. So the first one is because this slide deck just frankly wasn't, I had to switch around the draft of it. So it wasn't ready in time for Claudia to put it out with the additional materials. She was very, very adamant to try to get that, and I just couldn't get it. so that's the story around that. Thank you for being patient and just seeing this today for the first time. We will be sharing the slide deck. You'll be getting it through Claudia, and then she'll be posting it online as well as part of the materials. The question about being able to have this kind of conversation later on, of course, in any way that you all feel is useful for you. And then also whatever context is most useful. I mean, we can explore that discussion, what makes most sense. But yes, of course, on both of those things.
Thank you, Wendy.
Member Hassan, and I believe was had his hand raised, and then Member Perez. Member Hassan, did you want to speak?
No, maybe by mistake.
Oh, okay, thank you. Member Perez?
Yes, hi, good morning. I want to piggyback on Member Anaya's comments. I kind of too feel like, granted, I'm sorry, but I did have to miss the December meetings. But I thought we had formed a small ad hoc group to work on this with the consultants, and this was just going to be more of a briefing. But I feel it's a lot of content that we're getting, I mean, in this hour, just a lot of stuff. And I know I have to catch myself up a little bit, but yeah, I don't want to say I'm lost either as far as content. I know where this is going. It's just that maybe the process of exactly what we're doing with it, it's, yeah, I'm not sure I see what, I see that connection here. Definitely a lot of information. And I also agree with Member Curry. I think we need to have this information before the meeting so that we can definitely take a look at it, digest it. But I don't see like a clear path right now of, I know we had some emails, and then I know there's invitations from, you know, asking us to participate in other focus groups for the Office of Ethics and Integrity. But yeah, I'm just not sure how where the dots are being connected here, and it's just a lot of information coming at us. So those are just my comments. Thank you.
I don't see any other hands up or any other questions. We will get the PowerPoint out to you along with today's slides. There weren't too many slides on the other two agenda items, but all those will be going to you. In regards to the big picture, we can have the consultant at the next presentation provide that overall parameters to lay that table, and just say that, and when the consultant was, when we went out to seek the consultant in the statement of work that was before the commission, it sought out to make sure there was an inclusive, the mission statement was based on getting those best practices, gathering that information, presenting it, and developing it in context of national, local, statewide best practices, and looking at those, and then the unique factors that relate to our region. So we hear your comments, and we'll make sure we try to have those big pictures laid out at the top of each presentation, and how this particular piece of information and understanding of the materials and those other practices and those those academic pieces, what I would say laying the groundwork are, so that you have that at the next presentation. And yes, the ad hoc committee is getting the greater detailed information.
Can I follow up with a question? Is the small ad hoc group, the subcommittee group that we had that had signed up, are they still separately working with the consultants on this?
Yes.
Actively, and then they're just bringing back the information to our meetings here?
Yes, the ad hoc committee is actively engaged and working with the consultants and staff on the consultants on developing that and getting the greater groundwork and doing the detail work.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I wanted to just share a couple of comments. First, Wendy, Jess, and Guadalupe, thank you for the presentation. I'm actually a part of the small ad hoc group myself. And what we've been working on specifically is identifying the two different pockets of community members that should be a part of the, correct me if I'm wrong, Horizon and Baseline group. And that's very, very time consuming on their part because they don't really have a pulse of the community like a lot of us community members do that are part of that group. So that's taken up a lot of our time. So I wanted to speak to that particular piece. And I also wanted to speak to the importance of this strategy that we're involved in because it's a long time coming that we've really actually hired a consultant specialist in this area of demographic information. I know it's overwhelming, I know it's a lot, but for me personally, and I'm sure you all appreciate that we're involved in communities and demographic information, best practices, and at one convening like this and others to come is gold. If I could just use my own term, this is gold. This is something that for me as a member of the community, actively involved in different community organizations, this has been an unknown factor for me in terms of how we operate in the community based on making data-driven decisions, those that we can challenge and those that we know that we are implementing the best practice on behalf of our different communities that we represent. So I just want to say I appreciate the time, I appreciate the information, I appreciate the energy that we are involved in. And I may not be able to use it at this moment, but it will become something that I can use in the future in terms of ensuring that we communicate and act on positive human relations and also addressing the needs of our communities in a much more data-driven best practices manner. So I appreciate you guys, and we'll get through this particular process. Thank you.
Yes, this is Commissioner Estela de los Rios. I'm also on the ad hoc committee, and I'd like to echo what Commissioner Ellen just mentioned. This is a really thorough analysis, and I really appreciate it. And I know that several of you are overwhelmed, and it is overwhelming. But however, it includes the entire San Diego region, and I know that in our committees we are including, this is inclusion where I'm coming to include everyone's input, and organizations have been asked to join focus groups and et cetera. So I'd like to thank the committee, Jess Chacon and the consulting for doing this analysis, because it is a very thorough and articulate, and I look forward to getting that mission statement for our Human Relations Commission. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Claudia, we're on to the update.
Madam Chair, yes, let me go ahead and share my screen back. Denise, if you could please allow me screen sharing.
We're at agenda item 6.
Yes,
Board
agenda
action.
item 6, while I try to get my screen shared.
Okay.
Let's see.
Board action declaring racism as a public health crisis. Okay.
Let me go ahead and screen through. There we go. We wanted to bring forward to you the Board of Supervisors action taken at their meeting on January 12th. At that meeting, they adopted a resolution declaring racism a public health crisis and directed the CAO to report back to the Board of Supervisors within 90 days with an action plan. I want to go over these two items, the resolution a bit and the direction to the CAO for your reference and knowledge. I've highlighted there's a list here, and you will be getting this PowerPoint along with the consultant's PowerPoint later today. So you all have that, and it will also be publicly available on our Human Relations Commission webpage. On January 12th, the board in their resolution affirmed that racism is an urgent public health crisis and committed to working to end racism, and importantly, supporting community efforts to amplify and address issues of racism and to engage actively and authentically with communities of color in our county in conjunction with the Human Relations Commission. They indicated their resolution also supported the creation of a county racial equity action plan and other efforts to address equity in internal policies, procedures, and programs, and aligning and building on health equity efforts. And they indicated their resolution closes with that they supported the efforts to achieve racial equity and a just San Diego County. This resolution also included, the resolution and board letter were part of your agenda packet material sent out last week. But that resolution also made reference to the public health implications and effects from racism. It talked about the other areas of disparity in the other sectors besides health, housing, education, and other areas also. And this is part of one of the framework for the future from the board office, that the Board of Supervisors has now adopted. In addition, the board letter action also included direction to the Chief Administrative Officer to return in 90 days with an action to implement these following items. Identifying, or actually creating a process to solicit community input to identify county policies and practices that lead to or perpetuate racial or ethnic disparity with the goal of catalyzing change for just, safe, and healthier communities. In addition, revise the statement of values, mission, vision, and strategic plan to represent equity and inclusion as a core principle of the County of San Diego and the Board of Supervisors. Incorporate a section entitled the Equity Impact Statement and Board Letter Templates for all county departments to identify and determine a systematic approach with standardized guidelines to express the equity impact of recommended actions. And to lastly, enhance data collection capabilities to identify racial disparities among programs and services that are meant to improve health, social, economic, educational, and criminal justice circumstances, and prioritize funding proportional to need when possible. Oops. For some reason, okay. Yeah, I don't know why the other slides aren't showing up. So it may be helpful in when looking at all of these items on the direction to the CAO to know what is currently in place as far as in regards to equity efforts within the county. Clearly, as you all are aware, as you sit on the commission in end of May, the Board of Supervisors adopted unanimously to establish the Human Relations Commission. And the Human Relations Commission was to promote positive human relations within the community and recently adopted its duties and responsibilities, which were approved by the Board of Supervisors not too long ago. I don't know why the others. Are you gonna try and pull it? Okay, let me stop sharing. So in regards to the other equity efforts that are going in within the county regarding equity, diversity, and inclusion, we have various components. We have, like I said, we have the Human Relations Commission's work focused on promoting positive human relations, as well as fostering mutual respect and understanding among groups and communities within the county, including examining causes of tension, conflict, discrimination, and intolerance between groups, and providing recommendations to alleviate such issues. What you all do is what I best describe as external facing, looking at issues within the community that have implications, and so that the county to provide recommendations to the county of how to alleviate issues. We also have a Diversity and Inclusion Executive Council, which is comprised of county executive leadership representative of the workforce and from all of the business groups. Their purpose is to create a culture that keeps diversity and inclusion at the forefront for leaders throughout the county, workforce by guiding the county's diversity and inclusion strategy. In addition, there's also the Office of Ethics and Compliance, and their work is in assisting to cultivate a culture of ethics, which is directly related to equity, diversity, and inclusion. When employees or members of the public believe they are being discriminated against, the Office of Ethics and Compliance investigates those complaints. The Office of Equity and Racial Justice is what you all are working on the mission statement for, and they will be leading the equity and justice efforts requiring internal systemic changes that affect employees as well as the public. The Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Unit is a new unit recently established by the Department of Human Resources and is working to advance equity within the workplace and is what I would describe internal facing. The ERG is our employee resource groups work, and there we have employee resource groups. We have 10 of them within the county, and their work is, their role is to enhance cultural awareness, support workforce outreach, recruitment and retention, promote county initiatives through partnerships with departments and community-based organizations, and to provide professional development and networking opportunities for their members. These employee resource groups are generally nonprofit organizations and have independent, and they also have their own council. So all of these work towards advancing equity, diversity, inclusion. And while some focus internally in the workforce and some are work externally in the community, some do both. So we look at, when we talk about all the various groups in play, so to speak, in moving this matters of equity, diversity, inclusion forward, these are the various components. We just want to bring that to your attention for that overview, because when we get back to looking at the CAO report, there will be some matters we will be keeping you informed on, those areas that we may need to return to you for some input on. So we want to bring that to your attention, give you that update, and we'll keep you apprised as it continues to move forward. Are there any questions? I believe I saw Member Chavez-Peterson and Member Corey.
I'm just trying to, I'm looking at your bubble, like the chart, and I'm just wondering, maybe it's the acronym, but where the Office of Equity and Racial Justice, the new office that's looking to be set up, like where does that fit in? What bubble is it?
Oh, it's the OERJ bubble.
Oh,
it's
okay, there you go. I couldn't figure out
opposite from HRC. So yeah, so the Office of Equity and Racial Justice is immediately directly across from the Human Relations Commission.
Okay.
The Office of Ethics and Compliance is directly across from Employee Resource Groups. That office is, I'm the CAO's liaison with the ERG groups. Our Diversity and Inclusion Executive Council is across from Equity, Diversity, Inclusion Unit.
The director for that office is going to be reporting directly to the CAO. So will that director kind of be like owning kind of all of the different pieces of equity, diversity, and inclusion within the county? So all of these different bubbles.
As the mission statement is developed and the position is filled, its entire span, I think, will be determined at that point.
Okay. Thank you.
Member Curry, did you have a question?
Yes, Claudia. I was. This is Commissioner Curry. I was reading what you sent us from the agenda item, and I look on page 2, the background, talking about the effects of the pandemic on different, impacting several lives. I don't see any reference whatsoever to the Arab community in East County, which is a very large community, including lots of Iraqis, Syrians, Palestinians that have been very affected by the pandemic. And I wanted to see, is this a final, or is there something being prepared that will be inclusive of all communities?
So this was what was before the commission, before the Board of Supervisors on January 12th, and it is final. What I would bring to your attention is, while the board letter on page 2 does highlight certain groups, it also references all people of color, and the resolution itself makes
this thing about all people of color is really what has been affecting the Arab community for a very long time, keeping them invisible. especially in East County and North County. It's okay, I will take it up with my commissioner, with my supervisor.
Okay,
With the
there.
board.
It looks like it looks like my internet connection is a little bit odd. In the resolution, there is a specific reference to the COVID-19 pandemic has exacerbated racial and social inequities by disproportionately impacting communities of color. So it is inclusive of all communities of color, and
But it
is a reference to.
What I'm saying is it mentions specifically few, but does not mention the Arab community in East County and North County. I will take it up with the Board of Supervisors themselves. Thank you.
Are there any other questions?
Claudia, I have a question about that, the bubbles. So how does one, there's several bubbles here for several different purposes when it and as it relates to equity, diversity, and inclusion. So how does one know as a community member or even as as an employee, or how would they know where to go? I'm just confused about how the path to equity, diversity, inclusion.
Well, internally, we have resources on for our employees that are known regarding equity, diversity, inclusion, and those are provided to all of our employees and reported out to the employees through various communication streams.
Okay.
For the public-facing portions, the Human Relations Commission does have a web page. It's public-facing, as does the Office of Ethics and Compliance, should somebody have a complaint or concern regarding allegations of discrimination in their services.
Okay. I get it. Okay.
Member Anaya has a question.
Just real quick, this bubble chart is really helpful for me personally. It does put things into perspective at the level and how things are connected. If we take it, if staff has the time, which never does, but the staff would have the time somewhere, no rush. Could we take this one step farther and give us with a description of each of those offices? It doesn't have to be a long description, a 3-sentence description of what each of these does. And just, I think it's a good resource document to have in the future. I know, like, for example, I know some missions may be still being developed at the Office of Equity and Racial Justice, and we could say that, but at least the others, it's a good picture of everything and how we are all connected to this, or all in the same. Thank you.
We can do that. I don't believe there's any other questions. Madam Chair, we're ready to move on to item 7. If you'd like to move on.
Sure, absolutely.
At the last commission meeting, a public comment was received seeking information on the staff diversity of the San Diego Suicide Prevention Advisory Council. We looked into this matter and are reporting back to you all. We want to let you know that Behavioral Health Services contracts with Community Health Improvement Partners, otherwise known as or referred to as CHIP, to facilitate the council, implements the strategic initiatives with the council's action plan, and creates materials to help advance the action plan. So the San Diego Suicide Prevention Advisory Council itself is facilitated and supported by CHIP. They provide information, and CHIP also provides information and education opportunities for the community. The contract with CHIP has them serving as facilitator. So their staff is comprised of 5 individuals who facilitate dialogue and work with various community groups. They do not themselves provide counseling services. Their contract does contain a cultural and linguistic competency requirement, which includes providing demographic information of their staff regarding race and ethnicity and languages spoken. And this provision is provided in their contract and is provided in contracts depending on the underlying needs of the contract and tailored to address the populations served. Specifically, there was a request made as to what the demographic breakdown of those who are providing or the staffing for the council. As CHIP is that contractor, I did want to give you that breakdown. Like I said, they have a staff of 5, and it consists of 1 African-American employee, 2 Latino employees, one Filipino employee, and one white employee. And the languages spoken within their staff are English and Spanish. We can provide you further examples of what this contract does with CHIP does for the Suicide Prevention Council. If you would like that, we can go into further detail. But we did want to report back because the direct question was, what was the staffing for that program? And we did want to provide you all that information. It appeared, at least from the question, that there may have been a thought that this prevention council was, or this contractor was providing direct counseling services, and so we wanted to clarify what their scope of work was in supporting the Suicide Prevention Council and make that clear, because they facilitate the advisory council and their various subcommittees. And they do increase collaboration among local agencies, private organizations, and communities by coordinating and improving their suicide prevention activities and services, from health and mental health promotion and prevention through intervention. So if there's any, I'm happy to answer questions, but did want to provide that report back on the staffing levels. That concludes our report. I believe Member Anaya has a question. Did I freeze? Oh, okay, it looks like he lowered his hand. If there are no further questions, that concludes our agenda items, and we can double check to see if our public speaker. Nope. That's not what we have. It doesn't appear that it doesn't appear our public speaker, Ms. Maxwell, was able to join.
Okay. Let's see. Agenda item 8, future agenda items.
That's just the running list of the items that are on the agenda.
Okay.
And other than that, that concludes all of staff's presentations and all the agenda items.
So we're at the end of our meeting.
Yes, we are.
My goodness, 11:30. Well, thank you all for being here, and we'll see you at our next commission meeting. The meeting is adjourned. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Bye.
Thank you, everybody.